Ethan, have you finished brushing your teeth? At 7 in the morning, while preparing lunch in the kitchen as usual, I called up to the second floor. No response. He must be absorbed in his video games again. Oh my. You're going to be late. Walking up the stairs, I couldn't help but smile. This morning battle with my 8-year-old son had become our daily routine. When I opened Ethan's door, sure enough, there he was, sitting cross-legged on his bed with his Nintendo Switch in hand. His brown hair was still messy from sleep, and he was still in his pajamas, completely glued to the screen. Mom, just 5 more minutes. I'm fighting the final boss. Didn't you say the same thing yesterday? I gently took away the game console and handed him his school uniform instead. Ethan made a dissatisfied face but started changing obediently. It seemed we still had some time before his rebellious phase. That was a small comfort for me. Is Dad not coming today either? I froze for a moment at his sudden question. Mark, my ex-husband, and I had divorced 3 years ago. Fortunately, it had been an amicable separation, a decision made out of mutual respect for each other's lives. But it was still difficult to explain this to an 8-year-old child. Dad has a big job in Chicago right now. But you'll get to see him next month. Okay. Looking at my son's slightly lonely back, I felt my heart tighten. But this was the best choice for us right now. Life as a single mother working while raising a son isn't easy. My job in clinical research at Midwest Pharmaceuticals is fulfilling, and the salary isn't bad. Still, every day feels like walking a tightrope. Hey, aren't you having dinner with Auntie tonight? Ethan remembered while brushing his teeth. That's right. Today was my monthly dinner with Patricia. My sister, a top sales agent at Elite Homes, always made reservations at the finest restaurants. Looks like work at Elite Homes is going well, she had boasted when we happened to meet at the supermarket last week. She talked about closing one big real estate deal after another. But was I imagining the darkness I sensed behind her bright expression? 10 years of fertility treatments. With each cycle of hope and disappointment, I had watched my sister's heart slowly twist. I had even suggested adoption. But Robert, her husband, was against it. As the owner of Columbus Premium Taxi, he was kind-natured but weak-willed. Lately, I'd been feeling our relationship with my sister and brother-in-law growing colder. I was particularly concerned about Patricia's attitude toward Ethan. Her excessive interest, trying to treat him like her own child. And Robert watching with a complicated expression. Mom, I saw a strange person near school, Ethan had mentioned a few days ago. I'd been worried about his words. I myself had recently felt like someone was watching me. But surely that was just my imagination, born from fatigue. I jumped up when I looked at the clock. It was almost 8 a.m. We needed to hurry and get ready. Another ordinary day in our lives was about to begin. One evening, I sighed in front of the YMCA after-school care center. I was an hour later than planned today. The deadline for clinical trial data was approaching, and before I knew it, it had gotten this late. The recent increase in workload seemed to coincide with when relations with my sister began cooling. I'm sorry, Ethan. I kept you waiting. My son was sinking deep into the sofa, looking tired. Usually full of energy, he was unusually quiet today. He looked as if he were sensing something. It's okay, Mom. My head just hurts a little. When I put my hand on Ethan's forehead, it felt slightly feverish. He might have caught something with the change of seasons. Remembering that he hadn't been feeling well since morning, a wave of guilt passed through me as a mother. Outside, the sun had already set, and street lights were beginning to come on one by one. Orange light cast strange shadows on the street. Usually, I would call for a ride, but checking the app showed a 30-minute wait for cars at this hour. Several cars passed on the street, including a yellow taxi. The driver wore a hat pulled low and a mask. Let's take a taxi home today. Taking Ethan's hand, I raised my arm to hail the taxi. The car slowly pulled over. When I opened the back door, the heated interior carried a faint scent of air freshener. A somehow familiar scent. 1422 West Henderson Road, please. When I gave the address, the driver just nodded silently. It felt a bit strange, but focused on getting my tired Ethan home, I didn't think too deeply about it. Later, I would regret ignoring this intuition so much. The taxi started moving quietly. In the back seat, Ethan was leaning against my shoulder. Outside the window, office buildings and shops passed by one after another. Each time the street lights shone in, the driver's silhouette would appear and disappear. However, after about 15 minutes, Ethan tugged at my sleeve with a worried expression. His small hand had sensed something was wrong. Mom. A whisper-like small voice in my ear. That voice carried a tension that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old child. This taxi is going in the wrong direction. At my son's words, I carefully observed the scenery outside the window for the first time. Something was definitely wrong. The familiar buildings had become fewer, replaced by factories and warehouses. Under the darkening sky, the shadows of industrial buildings stretched ominously. Excuse me, is this the correct route? I asked the driver, but there was no response. The driver's figure seen from behind suddenly felt eerie. The eyes in the rearview mirror seemed to be deliberately avoiding us. With trembling hands, I took out my smartphone, and an unexpected notification appeared on the screen. The blue-white light illuminated the car interior. Destination has been changed. I felt the blood drain from my face. But trying not to frighten Ethan, I maintained my composure. Maternal instinct urged me to stay calm and think clearly. Hello, Emily. While pretending to make a phone call, I dialed 911. I struggled to keep my voice from shaking. The calm voice of the emergency operator offered a glimmer of hope. I'm in a taxi right now. I've sent the GPS location. We seem to be heading toward the Westland Industrial Park. At that moment, I met the driver's eyes in the rearview mirror. The eyes above the mask seemed somehow familiar. A terrible suspicion gradually turned into certainty. "Ethan, hold Mom's hand." My son's small hand trembled in mine. The air in the car felt heavy and suffocating. Whether from the heater being too high or nervousness, sweat beaded on my forehead. The sealed space felt like a trap. The scenery outside had completely changed to an industrial area. In the twilight, deserted warehouses and factories stood like giant shadows. The taxi moved slowly along the empty streets. In this place where even street lights were sparse, what was waiting for us? "I need to buy time until the police arrive." I prayed desperately in my heart. While maintaining outward calm, my mind raced through various possibilities. Would the doors open? Could the windows break? How to make him hit the brakes? And above all, how to explain this situation to Ethan? After what felt like an eternity, 30 minutes had passed, and the taxi stopped in front of an old warehouse. The engine was cut, and a heavy silence dominated the car. The faint sound of wind made this abnormal situation even more pronounced. The driver slowly turned around and removed the mask. The motion felt like a scene from a nightmare, proceeding in slow motion. "Robert." My voice trembled. The face of my brother-in-law. It was unmistakably Patricia's husband, Robert. His eyes showed no trace of their usual kindness. Instead, they held a kind of resigned emotion. The sound of sirens began to be heard in the distance. Ethan clung to me, trembling slightly. I instinctively embraced my son. Against my chest, I could feel his heart beating like a drum. Another figure approached from inside the warehouse. Slow footsteps. When I saw that figure, my spine froze. The silhouette illuminated by moonlight seemed impossibly distorted. Patricia. My sister's face in the streetlight wore an obsessive smile I had never seen before. That expression was completely different from the sister I had known. "Welcome home, Ethan." That voice seemed somehow detached from reality. The sound of approaching sirens. The dark warehouse. My sister's maniacal smile. And my son trembling in my arms. Everything felt like a nightmare. The warehouse was larger than I had imagined. Fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling flickered irregularly, casting giant shadows on the walls. In the space where old factory equipment lay abandoned, an bizarre scene spread before us. "Look, Ethan. This is your room." Patricia's voice echoed in the empty warehouse. Her voice contained an otherworldly excitement. In one corner of the warehouse, a child's room had been created as if cut out from a fairy tale. Blue and white wallpaper. A new bed. Toys and game consoles crammed everywhere. And on the walls, these photos. My voice shook. The walls were covered with photos, all of Ethan. Walking to school. Playing in the park. Laughing with friends. These photos had clearly been taken with a telephoto lens from hiding. Isn't it perfect? It took 6 months to prepare. My sister's face wore an ecstatic smile. Beside her, Robert stood like a puppet. His eyes were vacant, as if he didn't understand the gravity of his actions. "Patricia, please. Don't frighten Ethan." I slowly backed away while shielding my son. Ethan's small body was trembling. I could feel his fear directly through his back. "Frighten him? Me?" My sister's voice turned cold in an instant. "You're the one who's stealing Ethan's true happiness." Patricia took a step forward. As she moved, we retreated further. "I'm the one who can give him a perfect family. I'm the one who can give him love." Her eyes held an abnormal light. Was this how far the mental collapse from 10 years of failed fertility treatments had pushed her? "Robert, say something." I desperately appealed to my brother-in-law. But he looked away from his wife, staring somewhere far away. "I'm sorry, Nancy. But I have no choice but to obey Patricia." Just then, the sound of sirens approached from outside the warehouse. Patricia's expression froze for a moment. "The police?" "No, you." Her eyes filled with hatred. Her hand slowly reached into her bag. Cold metal reflected in the fluorescent light. "No!" Robert shouted and lunged at Patricia. In their struggle, the gun clattered to the floor. The sound echoed through the warehouse like thunder. At that moment, the warehouse doors burst open, and police officers rushed in. I held Ethan tightly. His small body was still trembling. But now it was from relief rather than fear. "Mom, are we safe now?" At Ethan's trembling voice, I nodded while holding back tears. "Yes, we're safe now. We're safe." Patricia continued shouting while being restrained by officers. "No. I was supposed to be his real mother. I have the right." Her screams no longer contained a shred of reason. Robert remained silent as he was handcuffed. His expression mixed regret and resignation. We headed to the police station for questioning. In the back of the patrol car, Ethan fell asleep exhausted on my lap. Each time we passed under a street light, his innocent sleeping face would appear and fade away. The interrogation room at Columbus Police Central Station was warmer than I had imagined. Beige walls, soft lighting, and white wooden table and chairs. It created an atmosphere almost incongruously peaceful compared to the nightmare we had just experienced. "So, Ms. Miller, could you tell us everything from the beginning?" Detective Linda Morrison spoke to me in a gentle voice. Her brown eyes held a motherly warmth. Next to her sat Dr. Sarah Williams, a child psychologist. My relationship with my sister Patricia used to be very good. I began speaking with a deep sigh. Changes started appearing gradually about 10 years ago, when she began fertility treatments. As I traced my memories, small discrepancies I hadn't noticed before came flooding back. At first, it was just excessive interest in Ethan. Birthday presents gradually became more expensive, and she always wanted to take him out on holidays. At the time, I thought it was just an aunt's way of showing affection. The detective nodded occasionally while taking notes in silence. But from last winter, she clearly started becoming strange. She would always appear at Ethan's school events. If we went shopping, she would pretend to meet us by chance. And when talking about Ethan, she began speaking as if he were her own child. That's when the surveillance began, wasn't it? The detective said quietly. On the desk lay numerous photos found in the warehouse. Scenes at school. Playing in the park. Conversations with friends. The dated photos went back a full 6 months. We had been watched for such a long time. We've checked the security camera footage from the warehouse. The detective took out an iPad and played the footage. The screen showed Patricia and Robert working in the warehouse. Setting up the child's room. Arranging toys. And covering the walls with photos. Everything had been planned. We also found evidence at the Thompsons' home. Robert's statement, taken in another room, was placed on the table. I knew my wife was becoming mentally unstable. But I couldn't stop her. No, I didn't try to stop her. His testimony was painfully honest. Patricia apparently started planning to adopt Ethan 3 months ago, when it became clear the fertility treatments had failed. At first, she was looking for legal methods, but just then, Patricia's screams could be heard from the next interrogation room. I have the right. I'm the one who can make him happy. Her voice no longer contained a trace of reason. Dr. Sarah began sharing her professional opinion. In Mrs. Thompson's case, the long-term failure of fertility treatments caused serious psychological trauma. Combined with envy of her sister's happy family, her grip on reality gradually distorted. What specific symptoms does she have? I was desperate to understand the reason for my sister's abnormal behavior. We suspect early symptoms of dissociative identity disorder overlapping with delusional disorder. In her mind, Ethan was likely already recognized as her own child. And she retained enough judgment to take planned action to realize this distorted reality. Dr. Sarah's explanation was calm and professional. However, each word deeply pierced my heart. Then, this photo. An old photograph was placed on the table. It was from over 20 years ago, showing Patricia and me as children. Playing with dolls. Innocent smiles. Back then, no one could have imagined this future awaiting us. The questioning continued late into the night. During this time, Ethan was receiving care from child counselors in another room. His voice, occasionally heard, was surprisingly calm. The police highly praised my son's composed response to the crisis situation. When the questioning finally ended late at night, I met Robert in the hallway. He had aged remarkably. Nancy, I'm truly sorry. His voice was filled with deep regret and self-reproach. I should have noticed how desperate Patricia had become. But I pretended not to notice. His confession was painfully sincere. Caught between love for my wife and right judgment, I made the worst choice. I couldn't respond to those words. Only the fact that this tragedy could have been avoided for everyone weighed heavily on my chest. When we left the police station, the eastern sky was already beginning to lighten. Ethan was sleeping exhausted in my arms. We've arranged a hotel. For the time being, you'll be under police protection," Detective Linda announced. At those words, I finally felt that everything was over. Before getting into the patrol car, I turned back to look up at the police station. Somewhere in that building, Patricia was still being questioned. Where in her mind did the boundary between reality and delusion begin to distort? And when did our family bonds start heading in an irreversible direction? "You're safe now," the officer assigned to drive spoke kindly. "Yes, thank you." The car started moving. Looking at Ethan's sleeping face in the back seat, I reflected again on tonight's events. The meaning of family. A mother's responsibility. And the nature of love. The early morning cityscape flowed past the window slowly. This nightmarish evening was over. However, this was also the beginning of new trials. My sister who would undergo psychiatric treatment. My brother-in-law awaiting criminal trial. And my son who would need trauma care. Our lives would never return to what they were before. Still, surely we could put what we learned through this experience to use somehow. Perhaps that was my answer to getting through this ordeal. 1 year has passed since then. Gentle morning sunlight streams into our living room in our new home in the suburbs of Columbus. Outside the window, maple leaves shimmer golden in the autumn breeze. "Mom, I'm ready." I turned around with a smile at Ethan's voice coming down the stairs. Wearing his school backpack, he seems to have grown a bit taller than last year. But the shadow in his eyes hasn't completely disappeared yet. According to the trauma care specialist, Ethan's recovery is progressing well. In weekly counseling sessions, he's gradually becoming able to face the memories of that night. "Can I play with Jordan at the park after school today?" That casual question made me breathe a quiet sigh of relief inside. Right after the incident, Ethan was extremely afraid of going out. He avoided crowds and was abnormally wary of being watched. Now he can enjoy playing with friends again. Of course. But be home by 5 o'clock. I still never skip picking him up and dropping him off. Even though the school is only a 10-minute walk away, I don't let Ethan be alone. Maybe it's overprotective. But this is what makes us feel secure right now. I changed jobs too. I left the pharmaceutical company and now work as a research consultant from home. The income is less, but I have more time with Ethan. Though it often means working late into the night at the computer. Is Aunt Patricia still in the hospital? Ethan's sudden question made me momentarily lost for words. His aunt's topic was still delicate for us. Yes, she's still receiving treatment. Patricia is under strict supervision at the State Mental Health Center. Diagnosed with schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, she was committed to 3 years of mandatory hospitalization. I've only visited once. Walking down those white hospital corridors, I was overwhelmed by complex emotions. She was really a kind person, wasn't she? Ethan's words brought tears to my eyes. A seed of forgiveness was already growing in this 9-year-old boy. That's still difficult for me. My brother-in-law Robert received a 5-year prison sentence as an accomplice. Throughout the trial, he consistently admitted his guilt and showed deep remorse. His testimony revealed the full extent of Patricia's plan. The child's room created in the warehouse. 6 months of stalking and photography. And meticulous analysis of our behavior patterns. Everything was preparation for taking back Ethan. In Patricia's distorted reality, Ethan already existed as her child. "Hey Mom, isn't there volunteer work at church this Sunday?" Ethan's voice interrupted my dark thoughts. "Yes, we're now active in a support group for women struggling with infertility. At monthly meetings, we listen to women with similar struggles. Some carry the same deep loneliness and despair that Patricia experienced. What happened then was scary, but I'm sure it had meaning," Ethan suddenly said while eating cereal at the breakfast table. "What do you mean?" "Well, now you understand how troubled people feel, right? And you started volunteering too." At those words, I couldn't help but hug my son. To think this small life could have such deep understanding. On our way to the door, I paused at the photo on the shelf. It was taken the day we moved into our new home, 6 months after the incident. Though we must have been tired, we're both smiling slightly. It was proof of the beginning of our new life. Stepping outside, the crisp autumn air enveloped us. Neighbors exchanged morning greetings. In this unfamiliar town, we had been accepted as members of a new community. "I'm off." Ethan waved energetically. Watching his back, I thought to myself, complete forgiveness will still take time. Understanding Patricia's actions won't be easy either. But through this experience, we definitely learned something. Everyone carries deep wounds. Sometimes those wounds can lead to irreversible actions. That's why it's important to notice and support each other's pain. Looking back, we've walked a long road since that terrifying night. And surely new challenges await us ahead. But we're not afraid anymore. Ethan and I had already found the answer. It was to keep facing forward even when wounded. And above all, the importance of protecting those we love. Perhaps that was the greatest gift this trial taught us. A maple leaf falls quietly again, as if announcing the beginning of a new season.